Our guest today is Silke Übelmesser. She is professor at the University of Jena and holds there the chair of public finance. She has a PhD from the LMU in Munich, and her research interests are public finance, social policy, education economics, and migration. The topic today will be about gender inequality over the life cycle, information provision, and policy preferences. So it's really a very topical issue given the Nobel Prize from last week, and we are really curious to hear about your research. The floor is yours.
Yes. Let's wait for the slides. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to present the paper Gender Inequality over the Life Cycle, Information Provision and Policy Preferences, which is joint work with Alessandra Casarico and Jena Schütz. Of course, you already said it a bit. You cannot start a presentation today about a topic like gender inequality without paying tribute to Claudia Rodin, and of course I also do so because a week ago, and that's really a very nice coincidence, he was awarded the economic version of the Nobel Prize for having advanced our understanding of women's labor market outcomes. And what I'm going to talk to you about today also has something to do with women's labor market outcomes, but also women's pension outcome. So if you have it more, how it doesn't turn. So to be a bit more precise, well, there are these gaps, there are gender gaps, and there are gender gaps in the labor market, and they are widespread, and they also persist when we look at the retirement period. And this means that women, during their whole life, one could say, at least during the labor market period, as well as during the retirement period, have a higher risk of poverty. And the policy debate has not been silent on that and has tried to strengthen female empowerment over the life cycle. And this has grown in the last decades, but we think that this persistence of gender inequality has not received enough attention, even though there's evidence that, of course, there are benefits of a decline in gender inequality on several indicators, including economic growth. No, it no longer works. Oh, before it worked?
Yeah.
Sometimes it works. No. Again? Okay. So it's about, the talk today will be about individual perceptions, individual beliefs. More generally, we can think about individual perception and beliefs related to different economic and social phenomena, for example, inequality, but also others like immigration or social mobility. And these perceptions, these beliefs shape what people want to see in terms of policy. They shape policy demand and also policy support. And it has been shown in the literature that perceptions can be changed, can be affected to a certain extent by providing information, while then the jump from changed perception to changed support for policy is not always so straightforward and is not always so easy to find in different studies. And here I just show you two studies, I think, which are very well known. One by Kusimenko, and there they show that providing respondents with information about inequality, income inequality, has only a small effect on agreement with policies which try to increase equality, even if the individuals would benefit from these policies themselves. In the paper by Sonia Setterly, one also finds somehow mixed evidence. She provides information to respondents about measures of the gender wage gap, and she finds that for some policies which she then proposes, support increases, but for others not. So overall, the evidence here is a bit mixed. So what do we want to do in this paper? What are our research questions? What are our aims? So we want to see and study the causal effect of information provision on respondents' agreement, first of all, with whether it's important to reduce gender inequality as a more general question, but then also whether respondents' agreement, we want to see whether respondents' agreement increase when it comes to specific policy goals and corresponding policy measures, which we then propose to the respondents. And we provide information here relative to two measures of gender inequality. So first of all, the gender earnings gap, and second, the gender pension gap. And some people who are part of our treatment groups receive then information about the gender earnings gap. Others receive information about the gender pension gap, and also one group receives information about both gaps together. So we want to see whether we find some effect from providing information about one or the other of these gaps on these outcome variables which we have here, which are related to reducing gender inequality. And then we want to understand a bit more whether we have differences in these treatment effects and whether we can explain to some extent where these differences come from. Okay. Okay, so here are, let's say, our contribution, at least as we see it. So first of all, as I've already said a bit, we combine the perspective on the labor market with the perspective on the retirement period. So we really want to emphasize this intertemporal, this persistent aspect of gender inequality. And then we also want to see to what extent providing information, especially about this persistence of gender inequality, has an effect about support for reducing gender inequality and the policy measures which we propose. Then, what I've already said, but without perhaps pointing out this very much, we focus on earnings. So I already told you it's about the gender earnings gap. So it's not about the gender pay gap. So what is the difference and why do we do it as we do it and not otherwise? So the gender pay gap focuses on the difference between men and women in terms of gross hourly wages. And the gender earnings gap, well, earnings are wages times numbers of hours worked. So with the earnings gap, of course, you capture the difference in the gross hourly wages, but also the difference in the numbers of hours worked. So this, of course, we'll see the numbers, the gaps are much larger, because you have a problem, let's say, in terms of this gender gap when it comes to the hourly wages, but you also have a problem in terms of gap when it comes to the hour work. But in the end, we think that this is the more, the better suited measure, because during the labor market periods, this earnings determines, well-being of women. And it's not necessarily what they earn per hour, but what they earn overall. And of course, there is this close link given the pension systems in Germany, but also in Austria, where when you earn more, you pay more contribution to the pension system, and then you have more retirement income later on. But when you earn less, then of course you have less retirement income later on. And so there is this very strong link between earnings during the labor market period and earnings during retirement. As I then said, we try to understand a bit more heterogeneous responses, treatment effects, and we try to understand a bit more, the drivers of these heterogeneous responses or the mechanisms behind. And we do this here for Germany, and I will explain to you in just a moment how our sample looks like. Okay, so it's an online survey which we conducted in Germany in 2021 among close to 4,000 participants, and this survey is representative in terms of gender, age, education, also residency in East and West Germany. As I'm not sure whether everyone is familiar with survey experiments and how they look like and how they work, I'd like to present to you a bit in more detail the setup which we have here. So I already told you we have close to 4,000 participants. And here you see we have 4 different groups. So this means that we have roughly 1,000 participants per group, and they are randomly allocated to these groups. So what are these groups about? So we have 1 control group and 3 treatment groups. And first of all, everyone, those who in the control group, but also those in the treatment groups, ask about their prior beliefs. What does this mean? they are asked about their estimates about our two gap measures, so the gender earnings gap and the gender pension gap. And then it depends in which group they are, what happens next. So when they are in treatment group 1, they get the information, the true value of the gender earnings gap. And when they are in treatment group 2, they get the information, about the true value of the gender pension gap. And when they are in this both treatment group, let's say, then they get the information about both gaps. While the control group doesn't get any information. And then from this onwards, all are again, let's say, receive the same questions. So the next step is that they all get questions related to our outcome variables. So these variables, I will say a bit more in detail in a moment, which are about whether it's important to reduce gender inequality and whether people agree with the adoption of the proposed policies. And then at the very end, again, everyone is asked about the posterior beliefs, meaning they are just asked again about their estimates of the gender earnings gap and the gender pension gap. Also those in the control group. And of course, the idea, and this is what these funny arrows here are meant to indicate, the idea is that as soon as people receive the information, those who receive information, they update their estimates, they update their beliefs, and then based on these updated beliefs, they answer our, let's say, questions about our outcome variables. But to not bore, let's say, individuals and not ask them here about their beliefs and then 3 minutes later ask them again about the beliefs, we have this posterior belief elicitation at the very end of the survey. But of course, we assume, yeah, that's at least our baseline assumption, that there is some updating. Of course, we check whether then there is some updating, and then based on the updated beliefs, they answer the question. While of course, for the control group, we don't have this.
Do you think there's an issue with individuals having very little time or taking very little time to really digest this information? Because the prior beliefs are built over a lifetime. Also, people have their prejudices and their views, and then you come with information and thinking that in the next, and they follow the survey through and they need to digest it.
No, that's true. So, but this would, let's say, rather make it less likely that we find something, yeah, and because two things could happen, yeah. People just are not able, yeah, to update because they are not able to digest the information, or perhaps they are not willing to update because they say, no, that's my belief for the last 30 years, and now you come with one number and I will not change my beliefs. So this could happen, that here we don't have the link, which we now assume for the moment, or it could happen that they update, and then at least updating meaning they repeat to us the right number, yeah. They want to be nice and they just repeat because they still remember and say, okay, then let's tell them the number they told us. But then they don't make use of this information for their preference questions. Yeah, both could happen. And then we wouldn't find anything. Yeah, and of course, I will show you in just a moment what we find. We don't find all over the place effects, but we find some interesting effects. So this would, let's say, that would be a bit countering that nothing happens because we find something and we find something. I will show you in 1 or 2 minutes. And this is different, let's say, especially we find something for this treatment group, as I can already tell you. And then, of course, you would need some reason why for some yeah.
But if you think about belief formation as a dynamic process and maybe one that can overreact to new information, I mean, that's just by introspection, how I work. You give a seminar presentation, someone tells you something, then you immediately say, oh, fantastic, why haven't I thought about it? Great idea. Yeah. Then you sit in the train home and you understand, oh yeah, it's too much shit. No? We were very right in not taking this into account. It looks good, but it is not. And so is there not a danger that ideally in an ideal world, an ideal experiment, probably you would give people information and then let them digest it. And there could be overreaction that biases results. There could be stubbornness that biases results.
Exactly. And of course, I will, we try to look as much as possible into individuals, but just as far as we have questions, and I will show you all the other questions around, let's say, our main questions, which try to help us to understand a bit better what's going on. And of course, you're right. Perhaps I jump 2 slides ahead. Yes, and then I go back. So this is the prior beliefs of the individuals. So you have here the prior beliefs for the gender earnings gap and for the gender pension gap. And in red, you see the true gap values. Though it's this is on the previous slide, but we will come back on this. It's 34% here and 37% there. And you see that most of the people underestimate the gap. So there we would tell them, hey, it's much worse, let's say, the gender inequality issue. But and this might be a bit related to your question. Some also overestimate the gap. Yeah, they think it's even larger, either because they really think it, or perhaps they haven't fully understood what we are after, or whatever. Yeah, and they, of course, would receive, let's say, a different information, not different in terms of the number we give them, but in qualitative content, because then we tell, well, it's not as worse as you think. Yeah, relax a bit, basically. And of course, here we don't separate, we don't have extra analysis for under and over. We have them in other papers on other contexts, but also based on survey experiments, but we could. But in general, you see here, I think it's 80% or so of the people who underestimate, or even more, and here it's a bit less, but the majority is underestimated. So at least the information we give them affects most of the people in the same way, telling them it's worse than you think. Yeah? But of course, whether they then believe it, digest it, and make somehow use of it, not only for our question, but also, let's say, for real life, there are a lot of question marks in this respect. Perhaps one back, exactly, because I just wanted to also tell you how we elicit our beliefs. Yeah? These are the questions. Of course, the original is in German, but still I have it here in English. So we asked, we now talk about gross annual earnings. So this is the gender earnings gap. And we explain that's before deduction of taxes and social security contributions. And then we say, take an average man in Germany who is employed. And the question then is, consider for every 100 euros this man earns gross per year, how much does an average woman earn gross per year? And then we want to make it again transparent that it's now earnings and it has something to do with numbers of hours worked. So we say, keep in mind that both men and women can be full-time employed, part-time employed, or marginally employed. Yeah, of course, it's still a complicated question, yeah, but we try to make it as transparent as possible as what we want to hear. And the correct answer here would be 66 euros. So for every 100 euro a man earns, a woman earns 66 euro. And then later in the paper and also in the presentation, but not in the survey, we just deduct 66 from 100 and we get this gap of 34%. And for the gender pension gap, we say now it's a question of pension. Again, take an average man in Germany has acquired entitlements in the statutory pension insurance. And then the question is a bit similar to the one before. Consider for every 100 euros this man receives in old age pension per year. What pension does an average woman receive per year? The correct answer is relatively close, yeah, for good reasons. It's 63 euros for the year we look at, and the gender pension gap there is 37. So this they have to answer, yeah? And then when you go one slide.
I have one question. So why do you go on earnings and not wages? And do you explain this a bit in the question, or is it just that you? This is all the explanation, but I think it's already quite a bit of text. We say, of course, here we have the little word employed, which would mean it's not only, it's first of all, everyone who is employed. And then we ask about 100 euros earning gross per year and not, I don't know, per hour. But of course, if you have never thought about gender pay gap, you might not be aware that now this is something else. But then we also point out that people not only thinking about full-time employed and compare full-time employed men and women, but the hours of work can be vary, and we take some, let's say, these numbers here come from statistical sources, and of course are then based on some averages over different groups of differently employed people. And it's not that we don't use here the gender pay gap because we want to trick people and we think they might have heard about the gender pay gap because we have this equal pay day, for example, and now we want on purpose ask something very different, but it's rather that, well, in the end,
At the end of the month, it matters what you have on your bank account. Yeah? As a woman, as a man, as a retiree, as an employed, and this is earnings and not hourly wages. Yeah, you cannot buy a lot from an hourly wage. You need times the number of hour worked, and that's then the relevant measure we thought for comparing gender wages or gender earnings. Yeah. Okay, so just go please ahead one slide. Okay, this we've already seen. Here you have the posterior beliefs. So at the end we ask about whether they can remember what we taught them before. Yeah, whether they have internalized it. We will see when we look at our regression results whether we see some effect or not. But at least we see that most of them remember. And here you only have those groups which have received the respective information. Yeah, here you don't have the control group, because I have also numbers about the control group somewhere in the slides. But here you get those who have received the gender earnings gap, so either those in treatment group 1 or 3, and here those who have received the information about the gender pension gap, that is those in groups 2 and 3. And you see, most have remembered, and the median now is exactly the true value, and of course there's been some variance.
It's an online survey, is that right?
Yes.
Can you scroll back in the survey, and do you have to remember, or do you just have, just check?
Whether they can scroll, well, because then they would do what they would.
But you said they remember, maybe they don't remember, but they just scroll back and say, that's what they said, 37, and then they put this stress.
Probably they could, yeah. But to argue a bit in favor of us, so these are people from, in this case, it's Bilendi. It's a big company who runs surveys and is used in many surveys. And they have some pools of people. Yeah, of course, you can argue, is this then really representative or not? But let's forget this. And these people get a lot of surveys all day. And I think they just click through the surveys. Yeah, they will not, it's not incentivized. They don't get any extra money if they now are very good in whatever remembering. So, of course, they could if they have some intrinsic motivation in being as good as possible. But it's anonymous. It's online, and they don't get any extra euro if they now do good here. So I'm not sure, but when we tell them here, for example, so some of them get the true information, as I said, and then they not get a number, because getting a number and then another number, but they are reminded, okay, you said, I don't know, that the gender earnings gap is 20, but the true number is 34. And then there's even, we even ask them, do you now think, it's just a little exercise for them, do you think you over or underestimated it? They just should look again at the two numbers and then state for themselves, I'm sure I underestimated this number. So it's a bit trying to put it a bit more more strongly into the brain, let's say, but that's all. But this is how we provide the information, and then many remember. But I don't know. Again, I think we have some evidence that I cannot rule out that they go back, but I think it's not so likely. They just click through and then they are happy, and they don't get very much money. They get a bit money when they participate. 1 or 2 euros, it's a bit the deal. So it's, I don't know, it's always strange why people do this, but there are a lot of people who do this, and I think they just click through. And for this little money, will not many, let's say, I cannot rule out it, but not many will go back and check something. But I can check myself whether they could go back. I would say they can. Okay, so let's move on, please. So, okay, and now we also want to understand a bit, but we are still, let's say, in the pre-analysis phase here, or preliminary analysis phase here. We want a bit to understand where biases in these prior beliefs come from. And here you see, we asked in particular whether there are some correlations with gender, age, and political leaning. And for example, we see here that gender is not correlated with how well your prior beliefs are. Yeah. So the females do not differ from the males. But we see that when we consider the young and the conservatives, that the young and the conservatives both, that this is correlated with a further underestimation of these gaps, relative, of course, to their counter groups. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you always have to see what is the reference group. So the young think that the gaps are smaller than the old, and the conservatives think that the gaps are smaller than the non-conservatives, which perhaps makes sense. At least for the conservatives, you might think that this might make sense. For the young, I don't know whether you think it makes sense or not, but probably it's a bit that the young, well, they haven't had so much experience themselves on the labor market, perhaps not so much negative experience on the labor market, and they still have the hopes that everything's fine and good. And now we tell them that, wait a minute, the gaps, at least, which you now find in the statistics for this cohort, yeah, this could of course be something to point out, they are larger than you think. Yes.
What does young mean?
Yeah, very good question. It's 45 years and young.
Oh.
Yeah, not really young, but yeah.
And what that could signal is that your strategy of averaging everything, cohorts and ages, might be a problem for people, because the young look in their let's say social environments, and you see little inequality, and I guess that's empirically true. And then the older ones look in there.
Exactly.
And they, of course, as time has gone, inequality builds up naturally.
That's true. But still, of course, we could now say that, okay, but now for the relatively young people, young meaning perhaps the 20 and 30-year-olds, that's no longer an issue with gender inequality. Yeah, we are now over this problem. But the fact, especially when you look at people and couples with children, and then the question who stays home and how does the reintegration in the labor market works, I would say it's not yet perfect. And sometimes you start right after your studies and think, okay, for me, this will not be an issue. Yeah, I don't need any policies. Everything will be fine. And then, okay, here we tell you, but sometimes also, especially as I've said, yeah, parenthood, this is also a point by Claudia Golden, makes a big difference, and I think still makes a big difference, at least in Germany. Yeah? There might be other countries where this is no longer an issue. So, of course, they might face then a bit different gaps when they are retired. Yeah, that's a true point. But if they don't do anything in addition and so on, they will also probably not have a very generous pension income when it comes to that. Yeah, but the point is, of course, well taken. And here we have two other, let's say, belief measures, a bit different from our gender earning gaps or gender pension gap measures. We also ask people whether they think that women or men are disadvantaged in the labor market. What you now see is that indeed we have a correlation with gender. Yeah, women agree much more with the statement that women are disadvantaged than men, and vice versa for the statement that men are disadvantaged. And what we also see a bit similar to before, that the young and the conservative all see a bit less that women are disadvantaged, a bit more that men are disadvantaged, again, always relative to the reference. Okay, so let's say something about our outcome variables. So they are all measured on an 11-point Likert scale from 0 to 10, 0 meaning strongly disagree, 10 meaning strongly agree. And basically we have two groups of outcome measures here, or outcome variables. One is this statement, which I've already mentioned before, namely the statement, it is important to reduce inequality between men and women. And sometimes I then refer later on to that as inequality or equality preferences. And then we have also 6 statements about policy preferences. Here you see the first 4 statements, which target, let's say, gender inequality during the education or labor market period. And they are like, you see that here. For example, one says the labor market participation of women should be increased. And then again, always the question, do you agree, strongly agree, or not agree, and strongly disagree? Then the career advancement of women in companies should be promoted. Again, do you agree, do you not agree? the choice of less gender-typical professions should be supported, and it should be made more attractive for women to work here. And always, so they get the statement and then they get more or less 2 examples to make it a bit more transparent what we have in mind. For example, you see here examples like this would mean having more childcare facilities or changing a bit the tax system and so on and so on. And for example, here it would also mean when it comes about the career advancement, introducing, for example, a gender quota. So that people know, okay, perhaps I agree with the general idea, but when it comes to more, specific policies, maybe yes, maybe no, but that's life. You in the end need specific policies, so we didn't want to have it completely in an abstract area. And then if you go ahead, we have also 2 further policy preferences, and they now refer more to the retirement income or pension period, and they say socially relevant activities outside the labor market should be taken into account in the statutory pension system via some pension points, as we have it in Germany, and additional savings should be made more attractive for women. So overall, as I said, we have 6 of these policy goals together with policy measures, which would help to achieve these goals. And to make it a bit better to be handled, we built 3 indices. We have then a labor index, which focuses on these first 4 policies. We have a pension index, which captures these 2 policies. And I think I will mostly focus then also later on the policy index, and this is just an index capturing all 6 policies. Okay, so methodology is simple because we have our randomization, and we also check whether this worked, and it worked, and we have a well-balanced panel, so we don't need any fancy, let's say, econometric methods here. Of course, you can add them, you can have some machine learning, but we don't have it here in the paper. So here it's enough if you have an OLS estimation, and you have here the outcome variable, which, for example, can be the policy index. Then we have a treatment indicator, which tells us whether someone is part of treatment group 1, 2, 3 or the control group. We have our control variables here, among them our gender, of course, age and political leaning variable, but we control for more things here. And what we then also do is that we allow for some interactions, but I will tell you more about it when we come to this. Okay, so let me present to you first our main results. Here we have our 4, let's say, different outcome variables. It's important to reduce gender inequality variable in our 3 indices. And here now you see that we control for a lot of individual variables. I only show you these 3, but we control for more. So when we just have first a brief look at these 3 here, we see that women are always more agree with the statements we've given here. So they are more, let's say, supportive for reducing gender inequality. And here we talk about the control group, women in the control group. And they also have higher preferences for our policies. Why we find, and this is a bit similar to what we've already seen when we looked at the prior beliefs, that the young and the conservatives, for them, it's just the other way around. But let me now talk a bit about our treatment effects, and this is what you see here. The first 3 lines are the treatment effects. And what we see is, for this, it's important to reduce gender inequality variable. We find that those who receive information about the gender earnings gap increase their agreement with this statement. And this holds even more though for those who receive both information, so the information about both gaps. For the policy indexes, you also see that it's only the both treatment, when I call it, let me call it like this, which has an effect, and their people increase their support for these policies. And all these variables here are standardized, so it's always certain share, let's say, of the standard deviation which these coefficients then reflect. So
it's not linear probability.
No, it's first of all, it's an OLS, but then we have just standardized our let's scored our variables to make it better comparable. So let me discuss a bit these results. Well, okay, time is personal, but I've already had so many questions. So
it's okay.
So you see that we see some treatment effects, but we also must be honest and say that they are mostly there for the dose treatment. So perhaps two questions you could have in mind yourself, and which I now take from you. First of all, is it an information effect? Okay. First of all, we would say beliefs are updated, so something happens, but perhaps they went back, but whatever, something happened. But could it all be priming or salience? Yeah, just people already knew what we told them, but now it became just more, they became more aware of it, it became all more salient to them. Well, here, what we think helps us in arguing against is that everyone was asked about their prior beliefs. Everyone was asked at the beginning about estimates for both gaps. So everyone had, if he or she took it seriously, to think for, I don't know, 20 seconds or 30 seconds. And given that we asked for these two things, everyone might have realized, oh, yeah, gender issue important. Apparently it's about gender, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, when we then find differences in the treatment, fine. But at least everyone should have the same, let's say, starting point, having had to answer the question. And if we talk about priming, then everyone should have been primed in the same way. Then what is also a popular question when you have survey experiments or experiences, is it experimental demand? Do people somehow guess what we are after, and do they want to be nice and just an answer in a way where they think we would be happy, something like this? Well, again, yeah, perhaps, but again, given that everyone would then be primed in the same way and would perhaps guess in the same way what we are after, we would expect the same type of that level shifting, let's say, experimental demand effect. So this shouldn't disturb, let's say, our treatment effects. If there is an experimental demand effect at all, because we could also say, this is a bit what I've already replied to Gabriel before, they are not incentivized, so why should they really try to make us happy, yeah, let's say, with their answers? And the survey is anonymous, so they cannot even gain something in terms of, I don't know, social award or something. So of course, this is just a bit our line of argumentation here, but for this reason, we would say it's rather information effects than something else. Then the other question is why it's mostly the both treatment which works and not the providing individual information. Well, again, just some suggestions we can argue. First of all, of course, providing both types of information really removes uncertainty about the gaps. If you only give them one type of information, they might guess that perhaps also the other gap is a bit different than what they thought. But they cannot be sure, they cannot really be sure whether then this inequality persists over the lifetime. When we give them both numbers, let's say, and they believe us, they can be more certain about it. And they, of course, should become more aware of this persistence. But this is a bit how we, at the moment, for ourselves, try to make sense of what we find here in terms of results. But now we want to see whether the effects differ across our main, let's say, subgroups here. Yeah, do we find some treatment effects that are different with respect to gender, with respect to age, or with respect to political leaning? I will not show you the tables, I have them here, but I will jump right away to the next slide, which is a summary of the result. So first of all, we find that women react more than men. And we also find that even the control group, women already have higher, support for our statements. But still, even though they start from a higher, let's say, baseline preference level, if you want to call it like this, they react more strongly to the information we give them than men. That's, I think, an interesting observation. And it's especially interesting because it is a bit different when we look at the young age group, for example. The young age group also reacts more than the old age group, at least when we give them both types of information. But here, differently to our women up here, they, as you know, they start from a lower, let's say, baseline preference level. Yeah, so start from a lower level because they have not had so much experience so far, and so on and so on. Now they learn what we tell them, and now they react. Yeah, so I think both is interesting. they start from a lower level, learn and react more. And the women already start from a higher level of preferences, learn, and even react more strongly than the men. Okay, I think we thought it's interesting, but okay. And then what about conservatives and non-conservatives? Well, there, in fact, we don't find a difference in treatment effects. Conservatives have a lower baseline inequality and policy preference, a bit similar to the young, but they don't react more strongly to the treatment than the non-conservatives. So let me dig a bit deeper into what could explain these differences. So, because what could explain these differences? First of all, people could react differently if they had different beliefs about gender inequality. If you think it's a large gap, you might react differently than if you think it's a small gap, or if you had already very precise, correct prior beliefs, you might react differently compared to someone who had very biased beliefs. Then I already mentioned a bit when I was talking about the young and the old. People could also have had different experiences so far themselves in the labor market. And here we even ask them whether they think their wage is fair or not. We don't say fair, it's appropriate or not, compared to their gender peers or compared to people in the other, let's say, gender group, in order to capture a bit what people might have experienced so far. Then what could also lead to different reactions to our treatment? Well, people can just have different gender stereotypes. Perhaps they think that by nature, let's say, men are whatever, more gifted, more ambitious, have interest in different fields, and this then drives everything. Or they could also think that society expects different things from women and makes it perhaps harder for women to reconcile work and family, or perhaps society puts some pressure on men to be more, let's say, ambitious. So all these things could play a role here as well. And then what could else explain differences here in how people react to the treatment? Well, it's also a question, we talk a lot about policies. This policy index captures these 6 sub-questions. It's really a lot about policies. And the question is whether people really think that the state should intervene. If someone thinks that isn't it all a matter of the family, how they rearrange themselves, how they decide about who should work more or less, perhaps then people don't think that there's any need for policies. It's more, a matter of the family itself. Or perhaps it's more the companies, the firms who should do something. Then again, our policies, the policies which we suggest, are not so the appropriate ones. So this could also mean that people don't react. Or they could say, no, it's the state. The state really should do something. But unfortunately, we think that the state is just not a very effective actor. And all this could mean that in the end, you give some numbers and nothing shows up in the end. Yes?
Well, I think an important point should be whether I'm affected from such policies. Women who are extremely affected from such policies react. Young people who are affected when they are in employment and later on in pension, while pensioners would only be affected from policies regarding pensions.
Yeah.
There are different levels of exposure to the policies.
Okay, that's true. Yeah, that's true. So, and this is a bit what we, of course, when you look at the different age groups, we perhaps would have even expected stronger differences. We see some differences, but that's exactly the case. And here I only show you the results for the indices, to make it a bit more compact. But we also, when we started to analyze the things, we looked at the 6 policy measures separately, but there was not so much coming out. But there one would have expected that you find perhaps a relatively clear-cut difference between the older and the younger groups in terms of which policies affect them. So you are completely right, that this would also have been something we hadn't expected beforehand. So, but let's now, and this is a bit more explorative, if you go to the next slide. So what we know, so it's a lot of things, but you see I highlighted a few. So now we look here. Here we have the mechanisms I just mentioned. Here you have the prior beliefs, the own experience. These are the stereotypes. This is the question who is responsible, and this is the question whether the state is effective or not. And now we want to understand, and of course in the end we will probably then do a triple interaction thing, but I think this here also tells us something. whether the differences we have found for some of our groups somehow can be explained by what's going on in the background. And I said it's more explorative. So we've seen when we looked at men and women that women react more than men, you remember. And now the question, will we see here something? So you might say no, there's a lot of funny pattern going on, funny things going on, but let me try to put it a bit more into context. So first of all, one would say, but this is not here, women are more affected. Yeah, we have gender inequality, this is something at the expense, let's say, of women. So in general, this topic is something where women are more affected. And now, of course, we could go through all of them, but let me just point out one thing here. This part which captures our stereotype variables. So here we see, and the larger numbers always mean people agree more and they are more stereotyped. You see that men are more stereotyped and women are less stereotyped. And being less stereotyped might imply that you are more willing to take this information and change a bit your preferences. Of course, that's now just a bit speculation, but I think you can get something out of it which helps you to understand our heterogeneity results. So women are more affected, okay, and are less stereotyped. This, let's say, you see from here. And overall, this might explain why they react, at least provide some explanation why they react more to men. If you go on one slide, then we look at the old and the young. You remember the young react more than the old. And this was what we found in the heterogeneity analysis. And what can we say here? Well, first of all, we see here also there was no difference in terms of how well they estimated the gaps. Here we see that the young are a bit are not as good in estimating the gender pension gap as the old, because the number, of course, the real number is 37, and the old get closer, not very close, but closer to the true number than the young. So they know a bit less. And what we see here, this is about own experience. They also have had so far less experience, own experience of gender, of wage discrimination than the old. So we can say the young know less. They have less personal experience of discrimination. And for this, the information we provide to them might be more valuable and might make it clearer even that there is an issue and that this is not an issue that can be expected to go away like this, but which is rather persistent. This would be one way of making sense of what we find in the heterogeneity analysis. And then the last one for the political leaning. What do we see here? When we focus on the conservatives, we see the conservatives are worse in terms of estimating the gaps. So they know less. So we would expect if we give them information, they react. They react more strongly than the non-conservatives. But we also see that they are, to some extent, more stereotyped. They more think that it's by nature, that men are more ambitious, more able, and so on and so on. And when you just take the stereotypeness in itself, this could mean that they react less. Yeah? They are less willing to take up the information we give them. So they should react more because they know less, but here they are more stereotyped. And in the end, we could now make a story that this leads to no particular reaction. This is what we find. So as I said, this is not yet a proof in that, but we found it interesting to broaden a bit the picture and to see a bit more about all the other information we have in the background. And now I think we have to work a bit more in maybe in more structure. And as I said, perhaps we interact then a lot of these variables with our treatment indicators. But I think this already tells us a bit of what the story could be in the background. So let me now come to just jump over the slide and here. So this was a summary, but I think I probably already told you enough. So let me just jump right away to this concluding slide here. What have we discussed here? We have talked about information provision, and I tried to convince you that information provision is effective, at least for some cases, in changing people's views on the importance to reduce gender inequality. We have seen this particularly for women and for the young. And we've also seen that, especially this both treatment, where we stress very much that we have this persistency of the gender inequality problem, here shows some effect. At the moment, there is quite a bit of ongoing work. First of all, we have a follow-up survey, which we have not yet looked so closely, a survey which we took 6 to 8 weeks later. And then we also have some open-ended questions to a question we asked the people, what do you think are the reasons for the gender gaps? And we have started to make word clouds like this. And I also have more of them by gender, by age, by political leaning. And this will, of course, not be a full-fledged analysis, but will give us a bit more even ideas about what's really behind the results we find. Okay, thank you very much. And sorry for my long 30 minutes here.
Thank you very much.